My entitled aunt invites herself to our family vacation, despite nobody wanting her there. A little background. Growing up, my aunt has always been a bit entitled and believed that my sister and I were beneath her and not fit to play with her children. My mother is also entitled to an extent, and neither really liked my husband when we first started dating. I was 19 and he was 26. Our first Christmas together we spent at my grandparents' house, and it was always the rule that the older children had to watch the younger children until they became an adult. Well, my husband made the comment that he thought my aunt was a terrible person because she threw a fit when he refused to go downstairs and watch the other children as we were adults and didn't have any kids of our own. This didn't go over well with my aunt or my mother and caused them to think and comment badly about him for 5 years. So in late 2020, my aunt started to hang around our house every week with my mother, saying that we treated her better than her own children. In 2020, our kids were seniors in high school and about to graduate, and I wanted to do something that we haven't had time or money to do, as I was always working 2 jobs before they go off to college. I started planning a family vacation to Disney and Universal Florida as a graduation present. At this time, my husband and I were both working 2 jobs so that we could save up enough money to support the boys while they were in college. That way they can just focus on their schoolwork. Now, at first, we did not tell anyone what we were planning for the reason coming up. However, it did get leaked to my aunt and mother what we were planning, and at first my mother was okay with it being just my children, my husband and myself going. My aunt, however, decided that she wanted a vacation too, and that she would just come with us on our vacation since we were already going. My mother soon thought that if my aunt was going, that it would be okay if she went as well. My husband and I were not okay with this, but having learned from the past, we knew they would make our lives a living hell if we didn't give in. So we agreed, and they knew that they had to pay for themselves. We were in the planning stages and decided that since our boys were so tall, it would be better if we drove to Florida instead of paying $4,000 just for all of us to fly, as we didn't have that kind of money. We were looking to rent an SUV as it was going to cost $2,000 for 2 weeks, and we had decided that after Disney, we were going to drive around to Arizona to tour our college campus and then circle back home. While we were discussing this, my aunt decided that we will use her car. My husband and I didn't like this idea, as it has a lot of wear and tear on that vehicle, but she insisted and we caved again. It was only the 4 of us driving down, as my mom and aunt were going to fly, and I would have to pick them up at the airport since it was an hour away from our hotel. While planning the trip, I asked everyone if there was anything specific they wanted to do so I could plan for it, as we had to make park reservations for each day of our stay since it was during COVID. I decided on which park we were going to based on everybody's wishes. All through this planning, my aunt says she is fine with everything and thanks me for taking all of this on. The trip starts and we drive down, and I drop the kids and my husband off at Disney Springs while I go get my mom and aunt from the airport. First, their plane was an hour late and no one told me. They knew their flight was delayed before they boarded and they could have texted me, but they didn't. After I pick them up, we head to the hotel to check in and drop them off at their room. I go and pick up my family so we can get them settled in the hotels as well. My mom has mobility issues, so she rented a scooter for the week, and my aunt said that if she had any problems walking the parks, she could rent on there. I do want to note that I have had a bad back and usually cannot walk or stand for long periods of time, but I was working on my stamina for this trip so that I wouldn't need a scooter as well, since the car was not big enough to hold all of us plus 2 or 3 scooters. Also, they decided that we would drive to the parks instead of using Disney transportation since it was faster and easier for them. So the next day we had planned to go to Universal for the day, and as we were staying on Disney property, we had to drive. Keep in mind that there were now 6 of us plus a scooter in this car. The first hiccup happened when we were looking for the Diagon Alley entrance so we could get our wands for the boys to use around the park. None of us had been to Universal except for my aunt, so we were a little lost, and I was looking on the app trying to figure out where to go. My aunt then starts saying that I don't know what I'm doing and asks, "Do you know where you're going?" I reply that as this is the first time I've ever been here, no, I don't know where we are or how to get where we're going. She huffs and puffs and starts talking bad about me and my kids. I make the comment that since she has been here before, she should take the lead and we will follow. She says no, and that I am better at figuring this stuff out. Eventually, we find the entrance to Diagon Alley and we get the wands and start wandering around. She's a little huffy about the fact that I stood up to her, but I ignore it and just try to have fun. There were a few rides we wanted to go on, but they couldn't, so we split up after lunch. My husband and I went one way, our kids went off in another direction, and my mom and aunt go somewhere else. While we were waiting in line for a ride, my mother calls me and says that my aunt was trying to get a scooter, but as the park was all out of scooters, she's going to take the car and go back to the hotel. I then told her that I have the keys. She said she brought the spare keys and that she will come back for us. I go into full panic mode, as my aunt is known to ignore calls and texts and will fall asleep and not wake up until the next morning if she is worn out. I tell her that she can get an Uber or a taxi to the hotel, as there's no guarantee she will return for us, and it would be a lot more expensive for us to get a ride back to the hotel than it would be for her. She then states, "It's my car," to which I reply that as we traded cars and she has mine, that it is actually my car until I get mine back, and that she can't just leave us stranded here. If it was in the Disney park, we would have transportation options, and it wouldn't have been a big deal. As we were gearing up for a war over the car, the customer service desk called my aunt and said that they had a scooter available. She was okay with that, and the whole thing with the car was dropped. I thought this was the end of it. I mean, I was angry, but I wanted to enjoy our vacation. However, this was just the beginning. The next day, we are in the Disney parks, and I have sent the boys off to have fun, since it looked like they were going to be stuck with my mother and my aunt for the duration of the vacation, and I wanted them to have fun on this trip. The morning was okay, but the afternoon wore on. My aunt kept making little snide remarks about how I was controlling everything and deciding where we went, etc. I told her that she is more than welcome to go her own way, as I only decided on which park we were going to. And so this was her attitude the whole week we were in Disney. She would constantly pick at me or badmouth me to my family and even to strangers as we passed. And every time I snapped back, it just seemed to add more fuel to her attitude. She wanted to go to a sit-down restaurant at the Sci-Fi Diner, as that is where we were able to get reservations. It was cool, as the tables and booths are styled to look like cars and picnic tables, so that it seems like you're in a drive-in. Now, as we were a party of 6, it is a little difficult to seat us, and when we were sat, it was at a picnic-style table. Because it was not a car style, my aunt and mother threw a fit. They caused such a scene that the manager ended up caving in and finding us a car table. I was so embarrassed that I pulled the manager and waitress aside and apologized for their rude behavior. At the end of dinner, as we were about to walk out, I discovered that neither my mom nor my aunt left a tip. The waitress was super nice and did a great job dealing with those two. I went back and added more money to the tip I left, as she was wonderful. So this was how the week ended up being with them, and every day after the first day, my aunt would ask when we would take them back to her car, as she didn't want to drive again because it smelled bad. She did know from the very beginning that we would be gone a week longer than them due to our other plans. It is our last day in Disney, and I had made a reservation for a character dinner that my aunt requested, but in these COVID times, everything is socially distant, and the characters no longer come up to your table. They were there, and they did interact with each guest, so they could get pictures and such. I had explained this to both my mom and my aunt, and asked if they were okay with that. They said they were. However, they complained the whole time about how they didn't get to hug Mickey or Pluto. And again, they failed to leave a tip for the server, who was bending over backwards to make sure we had enough of everything. But since they couldn't hug the characters, it was the worst meal they ever had. I was fed up with them at this point, and after we were done eating and paying, and after I had left the biggest tip I'd ever given, the boys, my husband, and I leave to go ride a couple of rides before we go back to the hotel. There was one ride that my mom wanted to go on with us, but she didn't communicate that to me, and so we didn't know and went on the ride without her. We met up with them when we got off the ride, and she was livid. We said we were willing to go on again, as there was no line and we liked it, but she said she just wanted to go back to the hotel. The next day, I drove them to the airport in silence and dropped them off. I cannot tell you how relieved I was to see them go. I later found out that my aunt had left my mother in the airport to get to the gate on her own in a wheelchair with her luggage. My aunt had the tickets on her phone, so I don't know how my mother would have been able to board the plane if she hadn't caught up to her, thanks to a traveling mother with kids. After they left, we continued our trip to Arizona. Our vacation lightened up, and my husband and I started having fun. And we thought that would be the end of it until we got home. Again, we were so wrong. Every day, about 2 to 3 times a day, my aunt would text my husband. She would not contact me at all, and ask when we were giving her car back, and he would tell her the same thing we told her from the beginning. When we got to the border of Colorado and Omaha, we did start to get a bit worried that she might report her car stolen, which would have cost me my job. Thankfully, she didn't go that far. After we got home, we detailed the car and filled the gas tank up so that it was much cleaner than it was when she gave it to us, and she wouldn't have anything to complain about. The next morning, we took her car car back and picked up mine. When we arrived, my uncle came out to the house and just stood there with his arm crossed and didn't say a word to me. Just stared at me like he thought I was going to try and get past him or do something to my aunt. I knew then that she had been telling everyone in the family how I mistreated her. I don't know what my uncle thought I was going to do, but I guess I didn't do what he expected because he stood there with a surprised look on his face. I just wanted to leave and go home, so all I did was hand her the keys and she hands my husband my keys, and then we get into our car. The minute I get into my car, I was livid. It is trashed and only has a quarter of a tank of gas. I gave it to her clean with a full tank of gas, mind you. That night, my aunt sent a text to my husband thanking him for cleaning the car and had to admit that it was cleaner than it was when she gave it to us. As we were leaving my aunt's house, my husband turned to me and said, "Yeah, I was right 20 years ago. This lady is a terrible person." To this day, that side of my family does not talk to me, and I am okay with that. My mother is still super upset at how my aunt and uncle treated me and has not voluntarily talked to me if she can help it. In the future, we have decided that if we tell the family what we are doing, we are going to tell everyone that it will be just the four of us and no one else will be welcome. This was the first major family vacation we had since the boys were born, and my aunt and mother ruined it for us. At least my kids had fun, since I wouldn't let them be dragged down by their drama. Oh man, these people are way nicer than I would have been. I would have cut them off from the get-go. I cannot believe they endured that trip with these two people. That must have been an absolute nightmare, and as it was described, oh my goodness, I cannot imagine going through that. Kudos to them for having way more patience than I would have.
The full version of this video is on the Am I the Jerk YouTube channel, so check out the link in the description for it, and if there are any updates to this, that's where they'll be, in the same link. I know a lot of times people like to listen to the Am I the Jerk podcast to chill out or put on in the background. Sometimes people even sleep to it or they do other things while they're listening to it. But if you're ever in the mood for just some chill music you want to put on in the background while you're doing your thing, check out Easy Mode. You can search for Easy Mode on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever you use, or just go to easymode.com. And as a side note, if you're a streamer on Twitch or YouTube or whatever, you can actually use Easy Mode music to put on the background of your stream for free.